Hello, me lovelies. Well, I've got Steve Wraith here to talk about Salvador, better known to people as Bronson, and how Steve has known him for many years. Because, as people know, I'd love to communicate with Salvador because, if he agrees to marry me and we get divorced a couple of weeks later, I can be famous. Oh, I'll be an internet sensation. Me and Salvador, I tame Salvador. Anyway, so just say hello, Carol, sweetheart, and hello, John Little. John Little's always on saying nice things. Anyway, so Steve, let's just waffle a bit until a few more people come in. So, what have you been? Well, you've been very, very busy. How's it going with the film? Give us an update on the film.
Going well with the film. It's in the edit now. The trailer came out. It's had some fantastic response to it, which is great. The distributor is obviously cementing the deals in the different countries. We've got I think 8 or 9 different countries have now taken the distribution rights. So it's going to get out there, which is the main thing. From my perspective, the one I'm delighted that it's that the people enjoyed the trailer. It's given people a little bit of a taste as to as to what the film is going to be about and what kind of action they can expect in the film. So yeah, A New Breed of Criminal hasn't got its release date yet, but it will be between May and June. And of course, as soon as I know, what the release date is, then I'll be making an announcement. But I'm pleased with the overall feedback. I think that
I think what it was, Steve, you needed the trailer because I know one part you were putting out photographs, from the set, and there was one part, in the course.
Yeah,
and I thought, oh, this doesn't look good. This looks like Chris Elba hates
yeah,
shaky sets,
wobbly sets and that.
And I thought this isn't going to be good, is it? And then when the trailer came out, I was like, wait a minute, this is a professional job. The trailer sort of put that to rest. Because the trailer looks very, very professional. But as I say, I'm still saying, I'm sure people will agree with me. I mean, my God, you needed a bit of sexy in there, and you just didn't,
Well, this is it, Anne, but I mean,
me,
part 2 hopefully will involve Anne. That's definitely there's a campaign, I believe, already started to get you in, and I don't think you started it, Anne. So
I want to be a tart. I want to be a real Daisy tart. I want to be something that I can never be in real life, and that's a Daisy tart. That's what I'm going to be. Oh,
yeah. You know what? It's at the end of the day, it's a tribute to me, mum, 100%. Because from my perspective, to be able to to do the film, to write the film, to produce it, and to to play a part in it, and essentially to put the whole thing together has been something that I've always wanted to do. And with the help of a very talented team, we've managed to do that. And I'm looking forward to it as much as everybody else. I'm not going to be involved in the editing process. I don't want to be involved in the editing process. I'll leave that to the experts. In the meantime, I'm excited that the film that I did prior to this, called Trafficking, is coming out on the 24th of April. So people who are keen to watch a film which which again is got a lot of various connotations, but is a true crime film, is it's well worth sitting down and watching that. 24th of April, that comes out all over the world.
Well, you see, this is it. This is where I say, Steve, trafficking and human slavery needs to be spoken about. I mean, we've got too much focus on what happened in the past in England and the empire and this business, but they forget that trafficking and human slavery is still going on, and it's in the millions. So why we're looking back all the time into history, which we can't do anything about because it's the past, why we're not looking at actually what's happening now is beyond me. It's like, why aren't people trying to help instead of going on, oh, my great-great-great-great-grandfather was, in slavery? Yeah, well, guess what? We can't do anything about that now. We can't go back and undo it. We can only say sorry. That's about all you can do. Where now we can make a real difference. But I'm getting on my soapbox. That does annoy me that we've got to have it going on today. So I'll be looking forward to the film coming out anyway, and I'll look out for that Trafficking one as well.
We'll be having a premiere or two, and so I will make sure you get an invite, and if you can make it will be good for you to come,
I'll definitely try my best. Don't you worry, I'll try my best. So anyway, and one other thing that's out, if people want to know, April, the Royal Ballet, new production is Sir Frederick Ashton's Cinderella. Stunning, wonderful, beautiful ballet. If you're new to ballet, that's one of the ones I'd suggest you go to see. It's been released in the cinemas, which will be absolutely fantastic. And they've revamped Sir Frederick Ashton's choreography. And, well, not his choreography, but the sets, because the choreography is perfect. So anytime in April, you see the Royal Ballet Cinderella, go and see if you want to taste of what ballet is like, and you'll save money, because if you actually went to see it live, for a good seat, you're talking about £240, which not many people can afford, can they? So I just sort of put that plug in. Anyway, Steve, getting on to the subject, Salvador Bronson. Did he call himself Charlie or Charles Bronson? It was Charlie Bronson, wasn't it?
Yeah, Charlie Bronson. I mean, Michael Peterson's his actual name. That was the name he was given on on his birth certificate. But Charles Bronson, after the Hollywood film actor.
Charles Bronson, Death Wish.
Yeah, after Death Wish. And my relationship with Charlie didn't really start until the late 90s and the start of the noughties, and it was really because I was involved at the time with a guy called Steve Parnell, who was based in the northeast of England. He was a web designer, website designer, and he was basically making websites for some of the well-known criminals at the time. Former criminals, of course, were starting to write books. You had the likes of the Crays, who had done Our Story and Born Fighter. Reg had written that, and then you had the death of Ronnie Cray, which then led to a multitude of books coming out. Laurie O'Leary wrote one about Ron Cray. You had Kate Cray writing about a relationship with Ron. You had John Dixon writing a book about being in the firm, the Lambrianou brothers. The list is endless, really. And with those books came the response from maybe those people who some of these people had battles with. So then you had the Richardson side of the story, which included Mad Frankie Fraser, of course. And with the books coming out, there was the websites followed. The internet was being in its infancy, and now was starting to progress. Websites and forums became a big thing. And Steve Parnell, as I say, lived in Gateshead, was a very talented young lad who just had an interest in true crime, and was asked by Dave Courtney to do a website. So he was the man who commissioned and put together Dave Courtney's very first website. And at the time, Charlie Bronson, who had written a couple of books, including a best-selling book called Solitary Fitness, was being managed by a guy in the northeast of England called Steve Richards. And Steve Richards was an author. He had written, again, a really successful book called Viv and the Geordie Mafia. He wrote a succession of books, actually, which did very, very well up here. Reason being that no one had ever written about true crime in the northeast of England. And at the same time that he was writing these successful books, he was also working hand in hand with Bronson, as he was known then, to put together his books. And the books weren't the best quality, it has to be said, but they served the purpose. And again, they became unique. They became bestsellers. And at that time, Charlie was probably at the height of his madness, I would have called it. He was in prison. He was in a cage within a cage, being fed through a hatch in the door. He was causing trouble for the authorities, and he was known as the Birdman of Broadmoor, and that was the nickname that he was given. So Steve Richards, I guess, had timed his relationship with Bronson well, and he was maximizing it for him and for Charlie. But as often happens with people who are inside prison, things happen which can cause a separation of the ways and a separation of the relationship. And for whatever reason, Charlie and Steve Richards fell out. it was as simple as that. And this is how my involvement with Charlie came about. At the time, I was asking Steve Parnell to do the website for me, because I was at that time writing my book about the craze, the very first book I ever wrote, The Craze, the Geordie Connection. And I was, I'd put pen to paper, literally, full scap paper. I was handwriting the book. I then typed it up and printed it off on a good old fashioned Microsoft Word processor. And then I started punting this manuscript around various publishers. Now, once I'd managed to get a publisher, I managed to go with a guy called Martin Ellis in Newcastle, Zimmergy Publishing. I needed a web presence to be able to promote and push this book, and to include things on my website which would help sell the book. And that was how I ended up meeting Steve Parnell. Dave Courtney gave me gave me an introduction, gave me his telephone number, and said, this kid, he's a boffin. I think that's the way he described him. Weren't all computer people called boffin in those days?
Yeah.
And I said, oh, well, he only lives 5 minutes from me. So I came out my front door, walked up the bank, and knocked on his door. He was living with his parents at the time, and we went in, and that was where the journey began. He was kind enough to start putting together my website. He was delighted to do so. And at the same time, with Richards' relationship with Charlie hitting the rocks, one day while I was sitting at Steve's and we were putting together this website, we got a phone call from Dave Courtney, and he said, would you guys be up for helping Charlie Bronson out? So, I said, well, in what way? I said, I don't really know too much about the guy. A quick internet search obviously educated me as to who this guy was, and Steve Parnell was fully aware of who he was. And Dave said, if you don't mind, I'll give Charlie your postal address, Steve, and he can write to you. And that was where the relationship started. Charlie was giving me my address. I got a letter from him, a 2-page letter, explaining that he'd had a fallout with this guy in Gateshead. First of all, he would like us to get his stuff back. He said he had boxes of books and letters and possessions that he would like back, and could I do that and then get the stuff down to his mother once I had it. So in the letter as well, it also asked if we would be up for doing a website for him and potentially helping him out, manage his affairs. And I thought, well, this is quite a lot of stuff to do, and I don't really know the guy, but I wrote back and said, from my perspective, I was more than happy to chase this guy up, but I would need his contact details. Although I know the books and I know I've heard of the person, I wouldn't know where he is or how to contact him. And with regards to the website, I would speak to Steve Parnell and ask him if he was up to making the website for him. And that was where the journey began, Anne.
So, when, don't worry, Poppy, I'll get your question in a minute and ask it. Do you know, at that stage when you first met him, what was his celebrity status then? Because this is what I find fascinating. I used to hear about him, but I didn't know a lot about him, like Poppy doesn't know fully about him. But what was it about what was his status then when you met him? Was he as big or notorious or what? Because people's status can go from, let's say, being notorious, infamous, hated, then suddenly liked, respected, then loved. I mean, you only need to look at people you've met. The Sex Pistols, they were reviled as something horrendous. Now, John Lydon is considered a national hero and loved by. So, what status was he in when you first met him? and hasn't changed.
I didn't know a great deal about him, man. I've got to be perfectly honest. And I think unless you followed the story, in the newspapers, then you'll be fairly unaware of him. I mean, at the time, that I was first introduced to him by letter, it was, you were coming round to the death of the Crays. Ronnie Cray died in 1995. Reggie and Charlie both died in 2000. And this is when my introduction came, 99, 2000. So you would say potentially that, Charlie wasn't quite as notorious as the Crays. The way the media works is very simple. They always have to have, the English media have to have somebody in prison or a villain who they can go back and do a repetitive story on. So, back in the day, it was the Crays and the train robbers. And there was enough train robbers to go around. There was always a story about Ronnie Biggs, what was Ronnie up to in Brazil? There'd be a birthday, there'd be an anniversary of the train robbery, and so on and so forth. And when the twins were alive, there was health scares, there was visits to each other, there was relationships, weddings. So the media love it. The Sun, the Star, the Mirror, the Red Tops love those kind of stories, and they get people used to buy newspapers, just to read about those people. Now they clickbait, they'll put a story out about it, and you'll be able to clickbait, and the money that's generated off that is substantial, because a lot of people want to know what is happening with Charlie. But back in the day, he probably wasn't as notorious, although within the prison system he was very notorious, because he had been in Broadmoor, he'd been in Rampton, he'd been hit with a liquid cosh, he'd been responsible for not once, not twice, but 3 times going up onto the roof of, Broadmoor and tearing the tiles off. He'd staged, protests. He'd taken Phil Danielson hostage, who was a prison officer. He'd taken governors hostage, and really, he'd become this, impossible prisoner, somebody who was impossible to control. So I didn't really know a great deal about him because I wasn't looking for him. But there was certainly press reports and talks about it. But was he front page news? Was he as big a star as he is now? Definitely not.
No,
so
I think
he went under the radar a little bit for me in those early days. He
developed over time, and then the film came out, and that sort of cemented it. But he was more or less, you only ever heard him with the riots going on. That's when you heard of him. But again, the internet wasn't around initially in those days, so you couldn't get that full on. But Poppy's asked a question here, in case people don't know. What was it that initially went wrong for him? Because it was the armed robbery, wasn't it? But was he going in and out of prison before then, or was that the one that more or less caused the biggest trouble for him? Because I'm not clear on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, he wasn't a prolific prisoner. He wasn't a mastermind prisoner. That, at the end of the day, he's best known, as being a violent, notorious prisoner. And like I said earlier, having spent, time in Rampton, Broadmoor, and Ashworth, that's what he's probably well known for. But his early days, he was arrested as a petty criminal. He was sentenced, I think, first in 1974 to 7 years imprisonment for armed robbery. And, from his perspective, it was as simple as that. I mean, you can never belittle armed robbery, because there's a victim, and at the end of the day, it's terrifying for a victim being on the end of that. But yeah, it was armed robbery and petty crime. He was somebody who would have a, wouldn't think twice about having a fight. I think his convictions, armed robbery. I think he was arrested for wounding on 2 occasions, wounding with intent, criminal damage, grievous bodily harm, blackmail, threatening to kill, but never murdered anybody. Never killed anybody. But yeah.
What was I going to say then? A question just came into my head, and it's just gone right out of my head as a thought.
The conviction that he got was for armed robbery, and it was he was 22 years of age. He was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment, and he was sent to Walton jail. but he, when he was inside, that was where his problem started, because he ended up on the punishment block because he attacked 2 prisoners without being provoked, and then the movement started. He was moved from there to Hull in 1975. He refused to work. He smashed up the workshop after an altercation with a prison officer. And then to try and control him, it was where he was first injected with drugs to try and calm him down.
This is what I want to ask. Do you think people will get a shock if he's released and they see him as he is now? Because of course he's a 70-year-old man now, isn't he? Do you think they're going to be in for a shock? Because we don't actually know for sure. We've seen the odd picture of him, photograph of him from prison, but do you think people are going to go, that's him, and get a shock when they actually see him in real life?
I mean, let's get this straight. There's a long road to go before Charlie is released. The public parole hearing is a massive step forward, and you have to give credit to his solicitor, and you have to give credit to Richard Booth, and to a degree as well to a guy called Rod who was involved with him prior to that. There's a lot of people have worked tirelessly and hard to change his his public perception, and he's worked particularly hard to change his ways. And I personally feel that the best he can hope for from this whole parole hearing is being moved onto the next stage, being given the opportunity to mix with other inmates and try to get some kind of normality. Once he has that and he behaves and he proves he can behave with other inmates, the next step, I would say, would then be to potentially put him into a lower category prison and see how he goes from there. There's a long road. I don't think, having spoken to him, and done the interviews that I did for best part of 2 years with him at his bequest, I don't even think he feels that immediate release would be beneficial to him. I know he would like it. Of course he would like it. He's been inside for so long. It would be wonderful for him to come out and walk the streets and do all the things he's been denied doing. But I think even he realizes that it would be a hell of a shock for him, and it would need to be taken down. But let's say he was released tomorrow. Would people be shocked if they got a chance to see him and meet him and talk to him? Yeah, I think they probably would. He's not a monster. He's not an ogre. He's not a giant. I'm slightly taller than him, but he's a physical specimen for the age of 70. He's trained, all of those years in prison. He's still very physically fit, and very strong for his age. But I think personally, the physicality of him isn't a concern. It's the mental aspect. It's the mental side, and that is the problem. And I think he's got to have help. He's got to be rehabilitated, and he's got to be helped with that.
Well, I said on your show that where we were discussing it the other day, at the end it suddenly tweaked. I thought, wait a minute. When it was this idea that he might reoffend, when he first gets out, he's going to be that's surrounded by people and media interest and, all this coming at him. He wouldn't be able to do it, even if he thought of doing it, because he'll be too busy and he'll be getting watched continually and pestered by people wanting to, speak to him and whatever, that he won't have the chance. But the problem is, if he's hooked on image and celebrity and likes it, because I've got the sense he likes attention. Well, the problem then he's got is, we know, Steve, don't we? It's a very fickle world, the entertainment world and it's celebrity world, and you have your lifespan and then you forgot. But I think in this case, I think he'll always have people interested in him. But I think the difficulty is that sudden rush of attention. And wow, we've got Salvador, we've got Bronson, which they'll insist on calling. We've got him here now, we can talk to him. That will eventually start petering down. And I don't know, maybe he'll have the mindset he'll enjoy it all. Then he'll just be happy to live a quiet life because he's been in solitary for so long. That's most probably he'll enjoy going back to being not pestered and asked all the time, and he'll most probably like going back to sort of like solitude where he's not having to communicate with people all the time. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the last time that he got out and he was released, I mean, he went and stayed with his family for a short while, but then, you know, the bright lights of London pulled him back in, and you know, the next thing you know, he's taking part in illegal bare knuckle boxing in the East End of London, and you know, that was when he changed his name from Michael Peterson to Charles Bronson. Paul Edmonds, the fight promoter, on that occasion, told him that would be the best thing to do. That was why he changed his name. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, that was after the famous American actor, Charles Bronson. He offered to fight Lenny McLean, of course, who was a well-known bare knuckle boxer, but he, you know, he refused. And yeah, he took part in a couple of fights. But, you know, I think this time round, coming out, you know, would be different. He has got, you know, Richard Booth, who has done a hell of a lot of work, you know, with him. And Richard's got a background in the prison industry, you know, working with prisoners, etc. A lot depends on, you know, what Charlie wants to do, I guess, and how he wants to do it. But, you know, I think going away, Kevin Lane said on our show the other night, you know, the best thing for him to do would be to go away and go almost into a self-imposed solitary for 5 or 6 months, you know, away from everybody. And
He won't be allowed to, Steve. He
just
won't
get
be
his
allowed to.
try and get
Yeah.
his head around
Yeah.
his head around being there. But, you know, at least go to some quieter part of
Yeah.
the UK where there's, you know, where there's less people, countryside, wherever. You know, that kind of integration back into society might be a little bit more beneficial. But then it's whether Charlie wants to do that, you know, and what Charlie says now when he's inside, you know, may not be what Charlie does when he comes out or if he gets out. And I think that's the problem. You make some interesting, you make some valid points. You know, he does like speaking about his past. He does like writing books. He loves doing his artwork. And, you know, all of that to be successful requires publicity and being out there. So, you know, I think there's a lot of decisions to be made, but only Charlie can make them. And of course, a lot of it will be dependent on what his restrictions are when he comes out.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah, we're forgetting that, aren't we? There will be serious restrictions on him. But I do think what will happen. This is my view. If he does get out, let's say it's going to be a long road before he does. But I think that it will be that huge media attention, which I think he'll enjoy. I've got a funny feeling he'll really enjoy it because it's a rush. You know, he's going to get right into that. But then it will, as I say, will peter out. And the good thing for him that he's got going for him, because solitude is his standard now. He's so used to it. He won't be destroyed if he does go into solitude and does relax and has the odd person or odd fan searching him out and saying, "Oh, can I have a selfie with you?" I think that's what he'll like eventually. But I don't think he'd be allowed to, which he wouldn't, just to come out and then go into solitude. He wouldn't be able to do that straight away because you know what the press are like and the media are like. When they want someone, they'll get them. And also, he's got to think he's got to make as much money as he can because he can't work. It would be difficult to get employment. So if he gets paid appearances and things like that, that's what's going to keep him going and settle him down. That's what I think. Anyway, that's the idea I have of what's going to happen.
I think. Look, it's very difficult, Anne, to predict what is going to happen and how it's going to happen because you know we don't know what kind of restrictions he's going to have when when eventually he does come out. And I think that's the big thing, Anne. That's the big thing until you know the announcement is made that he's going to be allowed to come home. Then you know it's academic thinking about that because things change, governments change, and I think we all know in our heart of hearts that in 2 weeks' time or however long it's going to take, he's not going to be walking out of those doors.
No.
But there has to be some hope given to him because you know the punishment really now doesn't fit the crime. And Phil Danielson, who has forever and a day in interviews that I've seen on TV, heard on radio, read in the newspapers, the prison officer whose life essentially, you know, was ruined by being taken hostage by Charlie in that infamous, case, you know, that's been shown many times. Even he said on the recent documentary on Channel 4, that he feels that, that he served his time and that, justice has been done. And I felt that in itself, coming before the parole hearing, even though they say they didn't watch the documentary, which I don't believe in a million years, but even that I felt was good for Charlie, because at the end of the day, it gives him a bit of hope. It gives him light at the end of the tunnel.
Do you think he is reformed, Steve, and he does regret this and he does censor what he's done to people?
Yeah, I mean, I personally think he regrets, a lot of things. I think he regrets certainly, some of the crimes that he took part in, and regrets certain things that he did. But does he regret going onto the roof and causing that damage? No, because it was a protest at the time. And he lived in the moment. I don't think he's not a liar. He's somebody who will give you it straight. And I think, when we agreed to do those interviews over the course of the 2-year period, we got a lot of honesty from him. You heard the real Charlie come out. He's not perfect, but then who is? He's got his own opinions, some which would be considered, inappropriate, maybe some which would be considered, extreme. I guess he's probably looked at by a lot of people as a bit of an extrovert. But then again, who wouldn't be
Definitely.
After being locked up for 43 years? I think what the interviews that I did on my YouTube channel with him prove is that after 43 years, the guy is still sane. And for that, he deserves a hell of a lot of praise. I think ultimately, he's older, he's wiser, he's been through a lot of provocation, by the authorities over the last 7 years that I know of, and has not reacted once. I know that in the parole hearing they said it was slightly less than that, but from my perspective, having visited them since over the last few years prior to COVID, and having spoken to him numerous times on the phone, and then obviously being involved in getting letters backwards and forwards, whether it be via email, a prisoner, or via the post, I've got a good inclination as to what has been going on with him, and obviously with my connection with Rod and now Richard, you get it from the horse's mouth. There's a lot of stuff written and put up onto the internet which is lies.
You'll always get that, Steve.
For instance, a couple of days ago, people were saying that he'd been given his parole, and it went round like wildfire, as it would. But it was rubbish. And from my perspective, I know what he's been through, and I know the stuff that they've tried to test him with. I'll give you, taking his artwork stuff off him, preventing him from being able to do his artwork, then giving him permission to do his artwork, but not allowing him to send his artwork out to anybody, because people were getting his artwork and selling it for a profit. So that was stopped. Why stop that? What difference does that make? What difference did that make to him? It was a test, Then, basically not allowing him to have certain foods, and him having to go through the process of actually, applying for a particular food and it, taking weeks and weeks and weeks to sort out. Me or other people sending in books to him, and then changing the rules and regs that you could only have a book sent in from a publisher, which makes it so difficult. Luckily, I'm a publisher, so my books were getting through. But then in recent months, when he, I think it was as he, his alleged son, it was, was doing a lot of interviews with him. He basically got him onto James English's podcast. This is the reason that my podcasts were made public, because he was then given a phone ban. Now, it didn't make any difference if my interviews went out, because he was banned from using the phone.
What did you mean, Steve? What did you mean by alleged son?
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that there's a discrepancy in George being his son. It's well known, I think, amongst friends of Charlie that that let's say the paternity test isn't something which we believed at all. And since the documentary, I think there's been a fallout between George Bambi and Charlie. George will always say that he's his son. I'm not sure what Charlie feels about that situation now. Reading Richard's comments on the Free Charles Salvador Facebook page over the last 7 days, you would imagine now there's been a part of the ways, and Charlie's not very happy with what the way the documentary came out. I've read George's side of it. He's more or less saying that from his perspective, he's done everything he can to get this to the high courts, and he feels let down, etc. But I've got to be honest, I struggled with the announcement from George that it was his son. He says he is. Charlie at the time, before the program came out on Channel 4, said he was. Do I believe it? That's why I said alleged, because
I wouldn't have thought that's a strange thing.
I think it needs. I think it needs. I think it would need clarifying, and I think there's better ways of clarifying it. I think getting a couple of hairs off somebody's beard, I think that's a strange way of getting a paternity test. But I guess that's one for the future. We'll wait and see. But I think it was a relationship that benefited both parties.
Yeah, that's it. And I think as well, Salvador's had relationships which we know were all publicity geared, weren't they? It wasn't actually a genuine thing that was going on. But because he liked playing that game, didn't he? So he likes the publicity. That's why I think if people are worrying about him getting, rushed by the media, I think he'll love he's a lovey. He's a wannabe lovey. He'll love it. If he never was in prison, I'm telling you now, he'd be the one doing all the acting. He'd be in the films, being the hard guy. He'd love us. He'd love us.
Well, this is where George was probably massively beneficial for him, because George is a former paparazzi who's got a history of making television programs. I mean, you just need to go back to watch a documentary I've got on my channel, which I uploaded years ago, called the lottery lout about Michael Carroll, the guy who won the £10 million on the lottery and bought a mansion and ended up turning into a stock car racing.
Well,
if you watch that documentary, Anne, who's in the background doing all the publicity? George Bambi. So
let's see, Kelsey, A Job for Your Old Carol. Try and find that if you can. What's it called again, Steve?
The lottery lout.
The lottery lout. If you can get a link for it off Steve's channel and put it in the live chat.
It's a fascinating documentary. It's well worth a watch. But that was where I first clocked George Bambi, and I thought, he's got a history of this. He gets in with people. He works with them. He might be transparent and let people know what the situation is, and it works for everybody. That's the way it works. It's the way the media works. When I published the Bride of Bronson, which was Paula Williams' book, God bless her, Charlie's final, his last wife, who sadly passed away. She wasn't very complimentary about him at all, and she gave a full in and out of the financial situation between them all. So from his perspective, it's work, I guess. It's an earner, and if people welcome him into the into their circle, then they clearly know what they're going to get, and that's it. But I just personally feel Charlie knew what he was getting into, and he was happy with it, and he's got to live with that now. He's got to move on. But poor Paula, she'd had a few parts in minor roles in soap operas such as Coronation Street and Emmerdale. And that was the second Bronson wedding I attended. I went along to that wedding in 2017, and it didn't last longer than a year. And she was getting a divorce.
Well, I think I remember when that happened, and the divorce was announced, and I remember someone I had to giggle, and it said, "Oh dear, we didn't expect that to happen, did we? We thought it was it was true romance, the romance of the century." I think that's it. Everyone knew what that was all about, and that's what was going on. It's like, I don't know why women do that, because it's not looked upon. I don't think it is anyway, Steve. especially with women, even though men do it, you don't hear men doing it so much. You know, when they go after prisoners and they start taking prisoners, and it's like, oh, have some real self-respect. You can't fall in love with someone that you've never met on the outside. You'd have to live with them to fall in love with them, and they do that. So it never looks good. And I think what is, people twigged immediately, thought, oh, this is a publicity stunt to try and get more parts, and it never works. It never, ever, ever works as far as I've seen. It never does.
That was very sad. I mean, I got a chance to meet her on a few occasions. I kept in touch with her. She was a lovely woman, but I just remember her being on Loose Women when Charlie'd actually sent a letter in and read it out, and she just looked crestfallen and heartbroken. And you know, I think that was the beginning of the end for her. You know, very sadly. I mean, a few years earlier, of course, Charlie married a Bangladeshi divorcee who had connections to the northeast, Sayara, and again, that was a strange situation. I mean, he changed his name and converted to Islam. He became Charles Ali Ahmed.
Actually, this is what I mean. He just tried it. He did try to stay in the publicity, didn't he? He did.
Yeah, I mean, you fair play to him, though. You know, I mean, that was it. It was. I think he regretted that more than he probably regretted the Paula wedding. But yeah, I mean, again, it's a publicity stunt. It's a chance to make a few quid and keep yourself in the public eye, I guess.
That's it, Captain. There, but as you say, people do twig us and realize what's being done. But now, getting back to your actual friendship with them. So, over these 20 years, how close as friends? Again, could you describe yourself as friends? Does he know all about your life? What's going on in your life as well?
Yeah. I mean, we have. You know, from mine and Charlie's perspective, we've had big ups and downs. And you know, from my perspective, we did the website. We took over for a short period of time. We took over his management at his bequest. We started off the fan club, which somebody suggested. You know, he was getting lots of mail. At the time, his artwork was starting to become popular, and he had a lot of time to write letters. So Charlie was more than happy to do that. But what you find in that particular world, similar to the craze, is people feel there's an imaginary pecking order. You find that you're a small cog in a big wheel. I found that with the craze. You think, if you think you're the only person who Charlie is writing to, and you're the only person who is going to do something for him, buying him some stamps and sending them in, or running an errand for him on the outside, then you're sadly mistaken. There's lots of people doing it, and I think my experience with the craze and doing similar things for them, and over a 10-year period, set me in a different mindset when I was dealing with Charlie. And he wasn't happy that I was still speaking to somebody who had essentially worked with him or worked for him, and he basically told me in no uncertain terms by letter to stop communicating with this person, and I just couldn't do that. For me, this person, was a genuine person. I knew the full story. Charlie'd been lied to by somebody in particular. Again, I won't give names, but I just felt I'm not going to get told by somebody, who I don't really know, not to speak to somebody on the outside when they don't know the full facts. So I put that in a letter. We exchanged a couple more letters, and we left it at that. There was no hard feelings. We just said, let's just move on and forget about it. And then it's probably about a year later, I got a Christmas card from Charlie, just wishing me all the best. And, and it was as simple as that, really. And then on the odd occasion, I would get a postcard through the door, just an update. It'd have a little spider on and a hand coming out of an egg or something like that. And it was just the typical Charlie drawing. And this started to become a regularity. I was going up and down to London still to see various people, and they would all be in touch with him. go and see Freddie Foreman, and sometimes Charlie would be be on the phone to Fred, and he would come on and have a chat, and that was it. My relationship was as distant as that, really, for a few years. And then it was when Rod got in touch one year to see whether he could arrange to drop off a painting for Freddie Foreman's birthday, that I then really reintegrated with him, and our friendship started again. Rod Harrison came down to Freddie Foreman's birthday party, brought Fred a lovely piece of artwork. And then I asked him how Charlie was doing. He said, "Well, you should drop him a line, tell him what you're up to. You haven't spoken to him for a while, just pass on your thoughts and whatever." And that was it. So it was me who, with Rod's, blessing and encouragement, decided to do that. So I wrote to him again, explained what I was up to, what I did now, that I was, by this time, my girlfriend who I was going out with when we last spoke, I was now married, and I had kids. I'd moved on from doing the doors. I was now doing, I was now an actor. I was doing writing. I had a publishing company, and it was just like a 2-page letter on what I'd been up to since we'd last really worked together, and thanked him for the the various things he'd sent us through the post, etc., and just left it at that. And it was a relationship then that grew through Rod. Rod and I got on very well. He had a lot of ideas and a lot of things that he wanted to put into fruition. And with me having a publishing company, he wanted to try and push a bit of business my way. And that's how the poetry book came about. We, I'd written some poetry when I was younger. Basically, it was, poetry that I'd written when I was a young man. And Charlie had also written some poetry. And we both basically, put our heads together. Charlie decided to do the artwork.
I was going to say, did he do the artwork? Because it's
good. Well, I sent in my poetry to him. He then drew the artwork for each of the poems. He then drew some artwork for the poems that he'd done, and we put it together, and we called the book Words Inside and Out. And thanks to Mickey Nesbitt, a kid in Gateshead, he put the book together, another one of Rod and Charlie's friends, and we published it. And it became a nice little collectible for those people out there who like a bit of like a bit of Charlie's art and like a bit of poetry. We did another book called Art Attack, which was limited edition. Again, worked on that with Rod, worked on that with Neil Jackson. That book sold out, which was great. And in amongst all of this, in this bizarre situation where I've known somebody by this time the best part of 20 years, I get the opportunity to go and visit them. And Rod said, "Look, if you Charlie, like me and him were on a call one day, and he just said, would you like to come and visit?" So he sent out the forms, and it's quite a difficult thing to go and visit a category, a category A prisoner, somebody who is in a segregation unit. You have to essentially go out and the police have to come out and see you. They have to vet you to make sure you are who you say you are. Once you've passed the tests, you then go onto the approved list, and then you put in for the VO and you go to see them. And the visit to Charlie, is a bizarre one, really, because you go to a prison within a prison. He's in Woodhill, which is in Milton Keynes. And, once you've gone in through reception, you handed your VO in, you get called up first, you go through and you're searched, shoes off, belt off, go through the scanner, and then across the prison yard into the main visiting area. You then go through that, you queue up at the canteen, where in the main visiting room, you get whatever he wants. Usually you would get on a visit, get him some. He likes the spicy Doritos. Get him a Magnum. Get him a couple of pork pies, and he's happy. A couple of cans of Coke.
Oh, so you can take food in for them?
Yeah. This is private.
Wouldn't they be scared that you've got drugs in them or something?
I know you buy it at the canteen in the prison.
Oh, so I get you.
So then you walk through the visiting room, which is when, you know, other inmates are starting to come in, and you go through another set of double doors, through another corridor, through another set of double doors, and then you go into another search area. So you're searched again, and once you go into this searched area, you're in what I can only describe as containers. And when you're in these containers, you're in a small room, probably the size of an average living room, and you know Charlie's in there with two prison officers who are there to take notes. And the first visit I had with him was fascinating. It was an amazing visit. He came straight up to us, give us a big hug, and you know thanked us for visiting, thanked them for going in, and then he asked us had I seen anything of Steve Richards. Of course, it was the guy who used to manage him, and I went, no. I says, I haven't seen him, you know. And he says, well, I'll see him when I get out. He says, I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. And that was his opening gambit with me. And then we sat down. It was me, Rod, and Richard on the visit, and he just got stuck into his canteen. And the visit flew over. We talked about football. We talked about boxing. We talked about what I was up to. We talked a bit about his time inside. He talked to the other guys about, different aims and ambitions and, being a free man and it flew over. And I had, in the space of eight months, I had 3 visits, which was quite a lot of visits to somebody in a Cat A. And each of the visits was exactly the same. It was good-hearted. It was fun. It was, plenty of things to talk about. And, obviously with us doing these projects as well, just updating them on the projects and talking about the parole, because at the time, prior to COVID, he was focused on getting this public parole hearing. But then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, it was, essentially a big blow for everybody, including Charlie, because it meant no visits. And, for him, lockdown wasn't hard to do. It wasn't hard to do because he was only out of his cell for an hour a day anyway. It just meant, he was back to where he was when he was behind the door, getting fed through the door with a cage. So he found it easy, but I think other inmates found it very difficult.
Yeah. So you can imagine now that, well, you'd know, wouldn't you? If he is released, he's going to be still in that system, isn't he, in his head? So he'll be very regimented in what he's doing and all this. But when you first met him, when you first got the invite, oh, come in and see me, were you nervous?
Yeah, definitely.
Or did you know him too well by then?
Yeah, you've got to bear in mind, I've met some very notorious people over the years. And I've met quite a few of them on the outside, whether it's the Sears brothers up in the northeast, whether it's Paul Ferris from Scotland, whether it's Kenny Noy in London, whether it's Freddie Foreman in South London, or the Richardsons. I've met them all over the years. And, I wasn't concerned about going to see Charlie whatsoever. I think the fact that we knew him so well and I chatted to him a lot and we'd exchanged lots of letters and we'd known each other best part of 20 years, just never met him. I think it made it easy for us, Anne. And the fact that I got to know him, for what he really is. He's a character, a funny character, and somebody who in my mind deserves the chance to progress through the system and be released at some stage.
Oh, he's definitely a character. You can tell that he's very much a character. And that's why when I asked you, I said, would people get a shock when they actually if he does get out, when he comes out, will they think, oh, wait a minute, that's not what I had in my head? That's why I asked you that question, because he is such a big character. And the interviews you did with him, actually, this is the strange thing about him. When you hear his voice on your recordings, that's how you imagine him to speak when you see the photographs of him. His voice matches his image perfectly. That's what I found so strange. I thought that voice matches his image perfectly, because you can just see that image in your head. But so what's going to happen now? Well, of course, you're still in contact with him. Are you finding that he's getting inundated now with people contacting him? And because, of course, he's fresh again in the press?
My interviews probably affected me more than it affected him, because from the moment that the interviews went out, Charlie was put on a phone ban last year, and it was the back end of last year that he was essentially stopped from making phone calls. It was a 29-day phone ban, and then he should have been back on phone, but then they said they would put him on monitored phone calls, and essentially he refused to have his phone calls if they were going to be monitored. So that made it difficult to communicate with him. And then for some reason, my visiting privileges were revoked, as were other people's. And then my letters weren't getting through. So
no, that's wrong. They should
any
let letters
any
through,
letters that I posted, whether they were standard class, recorded delivery, or registered, they weren't sent through. I even tried to email a prisoner. Obviously, I've got an account on there, never had any problems before. But then I started to get a succession of letters from Charlie, which were posted out, asking why I hadn't been in touch, and that it was difficult for him because he wasn't allowed phone calls. You know, he needed to have contact with people. Make sure you drop us a line this week. And it went on and on and on. I was notifying Richard Booth about the situation. I asked him to pass it on, and I can only assume that he did. But unfortunately, I'm still in the same position. There's no contact.
Just say something. If you send a letter and it's got the sovereign's head on the stamp on that letter, even a prison service cannot interfere. No, they can open it in a prison to read what's in it. They've got the right to do that, but they can't. As far as I know, they can redact things in it, but they've got to pass it over, as far as I know. Isn't it illegal to interfere with the Royal Mail?
I really don't know. It's not the first time and not be the last things go missing. Obviously, as a publishing company, we get orders. We get orders on the odd occasion for books to be sent into prison. We had one the other week to be sent into HMP Garth. We sent it registered post. We have the tracking number, and it never arrived. I've yet to have a book which I've posted to prison arrive at its destination, and in many occasions it eventually gets there, but usually 4 or 5 weeks later you get the impression that maybe someone gets the book, reads it, and then passes it on to the inmate when they feel like it. But
I can understand them doing that because they've got to check what's being said. And when I write to Cookie, I know to put a letter in an envelope so that the prison service can open it and read what I've put there so that they can see what's going on with it. But as far as I think that's cruel doing that, but also that's trying to goad someone into a response, to get a response from them. And I think what you were saying the other day, that he's been poked and prodded into a response. I see what you mean now, because that is that could cause havoc.
Well, it could do, yeah. I mean, ultimately, all it's done is it's meant that Charlie, the last letter I had from Charlie, which was at the start of the year, was just to say, look, it's your loss, not mine. If you don't want to write to us, etc. That's where I'm at. That's the position I'm in at the moment with Charlie. I know for a fact that when eventually the letters all get through, there'll be 9 letters which are posted, and there'll be 4 letters via email a prisoner now, which he may or may not get. That at some point he will realize that I was sending these letters, but at the moment they're just denying me contacts. I would say it's probably down to the fact that we did the tapes together. If that is the sacrifice I have to make personally to help Charlie out and to show people that this isn't a madman, this isn't some kind of lunatic,
it's wrong.
Then I'm glad that I did it. You know what I mean? And I think we both knew the risks that we were taking to do it. And for me, I'm pleased that I helped him out in whatever way I could.
But it seems a bit strange. Carol, is that the real immortal Dr. Ackpool? Me and immortal Dr. Ackpool, we're onto a thing at the moment. We're having a bit of a online romance, and I don't know if this is really him or not, because he usually keeps our communications private. So can you find out, Carol? Just click on him, see if that's really him. But anyway, yeah, it just seemed very cruel that to do that because so you didn't gain. I'm gathering from this, you didn't gain permission to do these recordings then.
No, I did look into the legalities of it, of course, and it's a lot of them are in the messages left on an answering machine. At the end of the day, the copyright is mine, and it's as simple as that. Really, it's a copyright, it's a copyright problem that you've got. Good news, it is the real Dr. Rackpool. Good evening, Dr. Rackpool.
Oh, my heart is beginning.
Good evening to Matt Legg and to Kelsey as well, and Carol and everybody who said hi, everybody in the chat, John Justice Allen as well. Good to see you. But yeah, look, it was a risk on everyone's behalf. It's no bigger risk than smuggling alcohol in for Reggie Cray to have a drink on, on a visit.
You didn't.
Yeah, I did.
Arrest him. Someone get onto the police and get him arrested now for that. Disgraceful.
This is unfortunate. That was the naivety of a young Steve Wraith, of course, back in the day. But it's from my perspective, it was a risk worth taking on behalf of Charlie, because it has to give. You've got to be able to have a voice, and I'm not the first person. I'll not be the last. Martin Brunt on Sky, I think, was the reason he got banned on the phone again for doing it. You know what I mean? He interviewed him. He interviewed him on Sky News, and I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I don't think it was necessarily my recording, but then I think there would probably have been an internal investigation at the prison, which would have said, right, Martin Brunt, Steve Wraith, George Bambi, no more.
Well, do you know what you want to learn from that, Steve? Right here, I'll put my face on, because you're going to get choosed now by Anne. And where am I? What am I doing? Right, that's what I do, don't I? That's it. Right, you're getting choosed by Auntie Anne now. Would it make more sense and stop any problems if you actually asked permission first, and they might surprise you and say, "Oh yes, go ahead."
Yeah, no chance in the world they would have done that, Anne. Because they don't want the real Charlie Bronson, Charlie Salvador, Michael Peterson, Charlie Ali Ahmed. They don't want the real person to be revealed to the general public, and the only way that he could do that is by doing something like this. And ultimately, it's the last roll of the dice, for Charlie Ann. And I guess when we look at all the publicity and all the stuff that he's done, the weddings, the books, etc., the film, which we haven't really touched upon, it's all been about keeping him in the public eye, so that he just doesn't disappear. Because there's people in prison and who, will die or have died in prison, who were probably every bit as dangerous or not dangerous, but who've gone unnoticed because they haven't been in the public eye, and probably some of them who didn't commit any crimes. Charlie's been in a lucky position to be able to put himself in the public eye, and I've helped him out.
I will do, Pablo. I'll do that. Yeah, it's like what Kevin Lane said when we were talking the other day on your podcast. I think it was Kevin that said it. He said that, no, it wasn't. Who was the other gentleman? I can't remember his name.
Terry Ellis.
Terry Ellis said, didn't he, that you just don't hear about the others in there that have got a reputation like Salvador. You just don't hear about them. In other words, it's kept quiet. So you're right in what you're saying there, definitely. But I'll start winding it up now, Steve, because it's reached the hour mark. But if he gets out, let's say he does get out, what would you? I'm trying to think of how to word this. If he does get out, do you think that will make your friendship together stronger, or you can say that because he's getting all the attention, you might just peter out, and would that bother you if it's also like?
Well, at the moment, we're not really in communication. I think he'll have other people who he'll want to see before he comes to see Steve Wraith. I think if he was lucky enough to get out this year, then his first priority really should be going to see his mum. And he does have family. I mean, he's very close to his ex-wife Irene. It's a solid friendship. Richard Booth, as I said, has stood by him, for the last few years, and is a vital cog in the Charlie Salvador network. And he's got lots of other friends on the outside, but I think he'll probably want to go and spend, a little bit of time with his mom, who is still here. With regards to me, if Charlie wants to see me, he often said on a lot of the videos that were done that he'd like to come to Newcastle and have a brown ale with us, and he'd like to go and watch Spurs play. He'd love to see Spurs play in Newcastle. Well, I'd love to do that, but I think he'll have a lot of other priorities first, and I'd love to meet him on the outside. I've met him on the inside. I've known him for the best part of 20 years, as I say, and for me to be able to shake his hand as a free man, that would be fantastic. I think it would be great. I'd like to think that Richard has the opportunity to guide him away from some of the charlatans that are out there. Some of the people who will undoubtedly try and make money off him. He has to be guided and has to accept the guidance, I think, and I'm sure he will. But I just hope, I hope and I pray that he does get the opportunity to walk through the gates a free man. He's only got himself to blame if he ended up back inside. He's got to really screw his loaf on and behave and avoid the kind of people who can get you back into trouble, and then and avoid the kind of substances which can alter your mind and lead you back into trouble. You need to screw your loaf on if you get out, and I'm sure he will, because he'll have fought hard to get out. This time he'll want to stay out.
I think that's I think he'll be. Everyone agrees. I haven't heard anyone say no, he should stay inside. He needs to be given that chance, and I think he's at that age when you have to say enough's enough. You have to. It's not helping anyone doing this. I don't think he will mess her up if he gets out, because I think he'll love the attention and he's got his artwork, and I think he'll be quite content with that and just go, off into solitude, and he'll appear now and again. So I think most people do think he should be given that chance, because if he passes away in prison, I think that's going to look bad, isn't it? That you never. And look what's happened. Look who's just been recalled back to prison. Gary Glitter has been recalled back to prison. They let him out.
Yep.
This is unrepentant, as the solicitor said, unrepentant. And
this is the thing, and that's what annoys I think a lot of ordinary folk, that somebody like Charlie won't be released yet. Gary Glitter serves half a sentence and is allowed to come out and be a free man. It's there's no logic. There's no logic in that at all, really.
Yeah. So it's so hopefully, and tell him he comes on and speaks to me. Oh yeah, that's the thing. Do you think he'll know about this they, them pronouns now? Do you think he'll be into the prison?
I think he knows a lot about those things. I think, like I said at the start of the show, I think there'll need to be a little bit of how can I say it, education about certain things, and I think that's where a slow release is probably more beneficial than a quick release. Tell him to come to me.
And I'll educate him in non-binary, all the issues, how he has to address people as they, them, is, it, or whatever is going around at the moment. So tell him to come to Auntie Anne, and Auntie Anne will explain everything to him, so it won't be a shock when he comes out the doors wondering, oh, wait a minute. Is that male, female, or is it not gender specific? You can get that from me. But lovely to speak to you again, Steve. It's been a while since we've had a discussion online, but we do talk behind the scenes, people.
We do, yes. And thanks for coming on last week's debate. I thought we had a great
brilliant
debate.
I enjoyed it.
I see Pablo is in the chat, but it was great.
Well, they say you're talking about Justice Right. Why did they let him out? They should have kept him in there. I'm telling you, he got an easy bleeding grift, didn't he? Go on, Pablo, get back inside. Go on. Let's start. Look, Pablo gets out, but look at poor Salvador. He's made to stay in. Oh, that's it. He'll never talk to me again now. Never talk. We'll let you keep your little girlfriend. The dragon lizard. your little girlfriend. But anyway,
Great to
so,
see you, and big shout out to the chat and the mods and everything.
and
as well.
everyone
A
in
really,
the chat.
really good night.
And thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, Carol. You've been brilliant. And John, if you're still there, if you want to be a mod, just let me know and I'll make it a mod. So take care then, Steve. Speak to you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.